Hello guys and girls, this is What's Bomb Waves here, and this is going to be part 0 of What If Female Deku was the daughter of All For One. Now then, as I said in my announcement yesterday, this, well, Izumi here is going to stay quirkless. She will not be getting All For One's quirk, because I simply want to do something completely different. Something from, at least as far as I know, no one has yet done. So, yeah, simply putting it, we start off this what if in, well, a private, let's say, hospital, which is, well, under the ownership of All For One. As All For One's main doctor, that being the one in the anime, simply putting it, is currently operating on, well, Inko. Because yes, in this what if, Inko is actually also a villain, along with All For One. And now, her name is, well, simply putting it, Eclipse. The reason for her name being that is because of her quirk. Of course, her quirk is different in this what if than in the, well, anime. And yeah, her quirk is essentially this. She can manipulate shadows. And yeah, by using that, let's just say those shadows have a lot of, well, potential. With the most powerful one being that they can obstruct the light which, well, human eyes receive. Simply putting it, it looks like you're in pitch darkness when it's bright day out. So yeah, that's her quirk. On top of that, she can also use it to essentially fire just pure shadow. She can make spikes out of it and, well, tentacles as well, if she wants to. And now, I believe that All For One's quirk doesn't need to be explained, but for all of you who don't know or have forgotten what his quirk is, essentially it's somewhat the opposite of, well, All Might's quirk, that being one for all. This All For One's quirk essentially allows him to take other quirks, rather painfully. The same way he can also give quirks, well, to other people. But, yeah, as we're currently in the hospital, Inko gives birth, and little Izumi comes out. But as soon as she does, something happens. That being that every single shadow in the room, well, starts to move. And with the shadows moving, so do the shadows of those objects. The walls themselves start to move. As the entire building is shaking, All For One enters the room. And using one of his quirks, he sees that Izumi's quirk is, simply putting it, a far greater and stronger version of her mother's quirk. With the point that Izumi can, simply putting it, if properly, well, if her quirk was to be properly used, simply putting it, she could move whole mountains with it. So yeah, quite powerful. But as All For One simply sees exactly how dangerous this quirk is, and now don't get me wrong, All For One would probably want his daughter to have this quirk. But I'm simply going to go with the thing where All For One is a caring father, so he doesn't want to see his daughter kill herself. Because that's what she was doing. Her quirk was far too powerful for, well, her current state. And that's when All For One, well, simply putting it, goes ahead and tries to take it away. He tries to do it, but he can't. His daughter has immunity to, well, his quirk, because after all, she is his daughter. And well, in the next couple of minutes, All For One, using several of his, let's say, gravitational and locking quirks, he tries to make sure that the entire building doesn't, well, collapse in itself, with Inko trying to combat her daughter's shadows. With even the entire fact that Izumi is currently only, quite literally, a couple of minutes old, her shadows are several times stronger than her mother's. And yeah, after some time, the doctor comes in with, simply putting it, a specialized serum, which, well, it doesn't nullify a quirk, it completely destroys it. And all for one, since he saw that he couldn't even take that quirk away from Izumi, and also the fact that he doesn't want to lose his first ever daughter, he orders the doctor to use it on Izumi. And he does, carefully injecting her, well, in her arm. And also, this needle isn't exactly like one of those big syringes, it was like the small needles which children use. But yeah, after that, everything comes to normal, with Inka using her shadows to, well, take Izumi before she falls to the ground. And yeah, that is how Izumi's quirk, well, reacted. But from that day onward, she was completely quirkless. Because of her father's all-for-ones, essentially genes, interrupting in her own body, she could not get any new quirks, but she could also not take any quirks. So yeah, simply putting it, if she was able to control her, or if she got her mother's much more powerful version, Quirk, when she was about 5 or 6 years old, she probably would have had better chances of controlling it. But sadly, she got the quirk when she was just born, making her extremely, extremely unstable and dangerous. And well, after that little fiasco, Izumi is put into, well, simply putting it, a bit of a, well, emergency. Let's say, how do you call them again? Essentially into an emergency tank, which is basically healing her. And when I say tank, I don't mean the military version, I mean like the ones in Star Wars, like the Bacta tanks. I mean that. It's essentially a big tube, and they put Izumi in there, and Izumi, well, starts getting scanned and also, well, healed. Because, yeah, after the doctor does some snooping around, he sees that her shadow control quirk has been completely erased. And when he says completely erased, he means completely erased. There is absolutely zero traces of the quirk in her system. But that's when the doctor also simply says that sadly they don't have any more of that serum. That was the prototype, which worked perfectly. The only problem was, he was going to use that prototype to essentially make thousands of copies. And these copies wouldn't completely get rid of quirks, they would simply nullify them. A lot. But with the first ever successful prototype being used on Izumi, that was no longer possible. But still, after 3 weeks of being inside of that tube, essentially, well, her health being better than when she was born, she is finally released. And the first thing, and simply putting it, when she opens her eyes, the first thing she sees are her mother and father, both smiling at her. And yeah, simply putting it, in this, well, what if, All Might and All for One don't exactly interact with each other. Because, and well, I don't mean to say that they won't be having a giant all-out fight. I'm simply saying that in the current setting, All for One and Inco are currently, well, in Europe. More specifically, Germany. With All Might currently being in the USA. So yeah, All for One is going to be too preoccupied with his new family to even, well, to even go to either the USA or Japan. And yeah, that's simply going to mean that instead of All for One's criminal empire rising in Japan or America, it's going to start rising in Europe. Although at a lot, how do you say it, decreased rate, simply because the countries in Europe and their quirk users, well, simply putting it, they don't exactly have heroes. Or at least in this what if they won't have heroes. I'm not exactly sure how this goes in the anime, but every single person who has a quirk, which is above the grade of 6 or 5, yeah, above the grade of 5, because let's say that in Europe they essentially put rankings on their quirks, all the way from 1 to 10, with the most powerful quirks ever recorded, like, let's say, All for One or One for All, is the 11th tier, something which very few in the world have ever achieved. And putting that in comparison, Izumi, if she had successful control over her quirk, would be in the range of, well, rank 13 instead of 11. So yeah, she was quite powerful. But enough about that, because after all, this will be a quirkless what if. And yeah, as they simply are currently in Germany, in a small town, not that quite far away from Berlin, but still a few dozen kilometers away, they are living, well, a happy life. With their little castle which they have, because yes, they do have a castle, All for One is a man who likes his medieval architect, so yeah. But as the years progress, both Inko and All for One, well, simply start noticing something. That being that Izumi is extremely smart. But there's also one little problem. Her health had begun to, well, deteriorate. Because with each passing day she grew sicker and sicker. Now, the reason for this being that the prototype eraser, or Quirk eraser, which the doctor had made, had a tiny, well, an incy-bincy flaw. That flaw being that it was essentially cancer. Yeah, it used cancer cells to destroy the Quirk genes, which can be, well, found in the body of Quirk users. So yeah, Izumi, well, simply putting it, she had cancer, but not exactly the normal type which we have here. More essentially, the cancer she had was, well, always on the run and always mutating. So one day she could be, well, throwing up blood, but the other day she could be, well, simply putting it, coughing quite a lot, and that's it. On some days she would only have a minor temperature, while on other days her temperature would be, well, like boiling water, quite hot. And that was Izumi's life, with her almost always being strapped onto a, well, essentially a leader called Iris, just so that she doesn't feel as much pain as she used to. And that's exactly what happens. Izumi was homeschooled ever since she was like 5 years old, because yeah, Izumi is extremely smart. Far smarter than even her father, which All for One simply smiles at, because, well, his daughter is, simply putting it, the genius of the century. And what I mean by that is that, essentially, Nezuko's IQ, you can simply give that to Izumi when she was 6 years old. So yeah, she was essentially the smartest human alive. Or at least that's what they thought. Because back in America, on, well, a certain family, the Shields, that being David Shield and Melissa Shield, were currently, well, speaking with All Might. And yes, All for One did kill Nana Shimura, that being All Might's, well, master, or teacher, shall we say. And yeah, that's as All Might and David Shield are simply discussing about where exactly is All for One, because he isn't in America and he isn't in Japan, with essentially both America and Japan's crime rates being at, well, nearly 0%. And yeah, I mean 0% in all. Petty thefts. Even the bullies in schools were, well, not bullying anymore. That's how much of an impact All Might had in these two countries. while in Europe the crime rate was somewhat stable, about 6.7%, so that they didn't exactly think that, how do you say it, that All for One was there. But still, David Shield and All Might are simply speaking to each other, with All Might playing with, well, essentially his niece, Melissa Shield. And yes, if any of you guys hadn't have figured that out yet, Melissa Shield and Izumi, well, I'm simply to say Midoriya, they're going to be rivals in this What If. And by rivals, I mean rivals which are both quirkless and which both use their genius and, well, technology to win against each other. So yeah, it's going to be quite a fun What If, I must say. But enough about that. As All Might stops playing with, well, Melissa and puts her to bed, with her immediately sleeping, or falling asleep because she was quite tired. And yeah, at that point, David and All Might start speaking again about how they are and about what sort of new technologies David Shield has made. One of these new technologies, well, being a certain thing called Praetor Suits. Essentially this, although this isn't exactly the thing which David Shield had made. The Praetor Suits were essentially types of mechs, which could be piloted by humans. This was, well, simply putting it, something which the quirkless people of the world could, well, use. Also because of the one fact that these things were actually made for the police force. And yeah, and I just noticed, I forgot to say this, in this What If, the number of quirkless people is actually, well, quite higher. Instead of being 20% to quirkless people to 80% people who do have quirks, it's instead 45 to 55. So yeah, it's almost at the half mark, where half of the world population has quirks and the other half are quirkless. That's also the main reason why, well, simply putting it, the crime rates are so low. But yeah, these are the Praetor Suits, or Praetor mechs, shall I say. Now then, these guys are going to have quite a big role in this What If. Of course, not until much later, or, well, not much later, but yeah, simply putting it, you guys and gals should expect Melissa and Izumi fighting with two of their own. So, yeah, but simply putting it, the Praetor Suits, or at least the Mark I, which was created by David Shield, was essentially titanium around a large endoskeleton, which a human could pilot. Now, the first Praetor Suits, or Praetor mechs, were only about 3.5 meters tall. As the What If progresses, they're going to become larger and larger and more advanced. Because from this picture right here, as you guys and gals can see, this is going to be the main type of Praetor suit that Izumi uses. Or, well, not exactly Izumi, more like her forces. Because, yeah, this What If is going to be quite exciting for me to do. But, simply putting it, the Praetor suits can utilize all types of technology. Ballistic, nuclear, radiation, laser, plasma, quite a few. And speaking of which, because of, like I said, 55% of the people in the world have quirks and 45% don't, technology in this world, or at least in this What If, has far greatly, well, enhanced. With the point that there are several bases, or shall I say colonies, on different planets, that being the Moon and Mars. And yes, this What If is going to be, well, like I said before, quite a fun one for me to do. But let's say enough about that, as, well, we go back to Izumi now. or well, not Izumi yet, through All Might and David Shield, with David Shield simply explaining to All Might what exactly the Praetor mechs are, and that they're actually supposed to be used for, well, the protection of the civilians by police. With All Might simply responding to that, so mechs which can be loaded with a bunch of weapons are meant to be used to protect civilians. You do realize that these mechs, if they get a hold of them, and by what he means by them, he was talking about All for One and villains. As All Might simply says, if they get a hold of them, they're going to use them for God knows what. And he also said that some of these that you're currently working on a nuclear version, that's going to be quite dangerous. With David simply replying, well, I do know that, but you have to remember, these are not only going to be used for, well, left off, that these mechs won't be just used for, well, police and the military. They will also be used to, well, essentially help building the infrastructure on the colonies. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and speak a bit more about those colonies. There are currently several dozen colonies on the, well, the moon. Essentially, they're slowly terraforming the planet, with both the use of advanced technology and Gaia, that being the hero Gaia. Simply putting it, what her quirk does is that whatever she touches can turn into plants. And, well, simply putting it, she has been on the moon and on the Mars, making vast forests to essentially be able to breathe on both Mars and the moon, with her actually being the current #1 hero in the world. Not All Might, strangely enough, although All Might is the close second. Because, simply putting it, Gaia made both Earth, well, a paradise. The Amazon forest is, well, back to its literal prime. There is no more need to cut down trees and all of that, and there's no longer the use of oil. Because they found several other types of energy. One type of this energy was a completely, well, new type, which was created by a Quirk user. His name was simply called, well, Magneto. And let's just say that by using his quirk, which essentially involved him being all control over anything magnetic, including the different poles, that being X and Y, yeah, he could create anything he really wanted. And by using that, he essentially made a whole new type of energy, which is currently called Arcanum. The Arcanum energy is, well, the most sustainable type in the entirety of the, well, Milky Way. So simply putting it, this is the main type of energy source, which is used for both lasers and plasma throwers. Because yes, in this what if, there's going to be a lot of different ideas I put into it. But enough about that. Has David Shield, after he said that, simply responds to All Might, saying that there is absolutely no way that All for One would be able to get them. This is project that he's been doing in secret by only a trusted few individuals. And meanwhile, we go to one of these individuals in his private quarters, speaking to All for One. Quite anticlimactic. But yeah, this individual simply tells him what exactly David Shield is doing, along with All Might. And yeah, after All for One hears that, he starts assembling a bit of a crew. He won't be going himself, but he's going to hire several mercenaries, along with a couple of tier 8 villains, which are quite high up there, because the number of heroes and villains combined which are in the tier 10 class of quirks, is about several thousand in the entire world, while there is only a couple of dozen class 11s in the world, with a couple of them simply being, well, Magneto, or, well, the Quirk user who can control magnets, or, well, different types of poles, that being X and Y, Gaia, who can quite literally make life anywhere she goes, All Might and All for One. They're some of the class 11, that is, they're some of the rank 11 class Quirk wielders. But enough about that. As All for One is currently making his team, someone enters into the preparation room, that being a 6-year-old Izumi, who is currently in a wheelchair, because, yeah, her sickness has been getting quite, well, bad. With All for One and Inko are prepared for the worst, because, yeah. But, simply putting it, Inko is trying to find a way on if there is some sort of way to, well, heal her daughter, with All for One doing the same. The entire reason why he is going after these mechs is because of their experimental type of Arcanum energy. And now, this isn't a regular Arcanum energy which can literally be found in cars, and also, well, putting it, flying cars, bicycles, planes, all that. This type of Arcanum energy is a lot more, well, for no better terms, it is quite more explosive. And yeah, this Arcanum energy is the one which is currently located in the 5 mechs which are being, well, transported from America all the way to, well, Ireland. Because that is, simply putting it, one of where the main base is located for the David Shield Corporation, at least the main one in Europe. And yeah, All for One start assembling a team to essentially get in there and steal all 5 mechs. And well, that's exactly then Izumi enters the room. Sorry about that, guys. Where was I? Ah, right. As Izumi enters essentially the conference room, All for One essentially bends down and hugs her tightly. He doesn't hurt her in any way, shape or form, he simply gives her a giant bear hug. And yeah, with Izumi actually being quite happy. And that's when All for One simply looks at her face. Traces of blood, which she essentially threw up about 20 minutes earlier, along with her extremely pale face. And right behind her comes the doctor, which, yeah, essentially Izumi sees the doctor as her grandpa, and the doctor also sees, well, Izumi as her granddaughter, and he's quite happy to, well, be seen that way by the lady, because that's how he, well, calls them. Or, well, he calls Izumi the young lady, he calls Ingo my lady, and he calls, well, All for One my lord. Yeah, going in with the whole queen, king, and the princess vibe. But yeah, as simply putting it, Izumi goes ahead and plays with her, well, pet dog. Because yeah, she has it. It's a German Shepherd. Quite a cute little pupper. Because yeah, it's a little puppy still. So yeah. As one of the goons of, well, the doctor simply comes around and actually starts, well, making Izumi go to the corner of the room where there's essentially a place set for her, with the pupper also being there. And yeah, as the doctor then starts speaking with All for One, is it ready, my lord? That being the mercenaries along with your own team. With All for One responding, not yet. It's going to take at least a couple of more weeks for them to fully assemble and get everything on the road. But we have time. The mechs are going to be sent out in, 2 months. The reason why I'm, well, getting all of them to, well, mobilize as soon as possible is because the scientists which I had inside of David Shield's company, well, as he told me, David Shield might change up, well, the date of the mechs going to Ireland. And as the scientist told me, if they get to Ireland, or at least the main Ireland base, they're going to be impossible to get through. Oh. Okay. Now, as I left off with with All for One explaining, or that is, the doctor explaining that the main base in Ireland is, well, quite large. By quite large, I mean that the outer walls, or well, the outer walls, begin at 25 kilometers away from the main center of the base. On those walls are heavy artillery pieces which makes the entire research center look like the most heavily fortified military base in the entirety of Europe. With the exception, of course, our, well, Omega base. With All for One simply saying, it's not heavily fortified. I might need to come with them then. With the doctor immediately saying, no, my lord, please, listen. I know that you care about your daughter, and trust me, the mercenaries along with the villains I have procured are all top of the line. They're going to be able to get the job done. And trust me, all the mercenaries which I hired are, simply putting it, bound to me. If you're wondering how, well, let's just say that several explosive chips in the neck do the job fine. But the other villains are actually people who already met your daughter, your highness, or my lord, with All for One simply saying, what do you mean I met her already? Well, do you remember the group of new recruits which arrived 1 year ago? The ones which were stationed to protect your daughter while she was, well, going to kindergarten? Yes, those were them. The 5 villains who followed her were all class 8, quite powerful indeed. And well, they made quite a bond with your daughter, with one of them actually, the female one, which is also the team leader, Evia, with her actually, well, seeing Izumi as a bit of a, well, younger sister, and Izumi seeing her as her older sister. So yes, if anything, Evia is going to be the main one, who's essentially going to throw herself at the gates of, well, hell itself, to get those mechs for, well, Izumi. So there is no need to fear, my lord. They are going to get the job done. And well, after that, All for One simply says, I hope you're right. We will not be getting a second chance at this. And well, after that little conversation, All for One goes ahead and starts, well, playing with Izumi, along with their little puppy, whose name is going to be Rex, because why not? It's a basic name, but hey, the German Shepherd Rex has a nice ring to it. And well, simply putting it, after, again, sorry about that guys, I'm actually quite sick today, so yeah, the reason why I keep stopping the video is, well, mainly because I believe that I'm going to sneeze and then I don't sneeze, which is extremely annoying. But yeah, enough about that. As, well, All for One and Izumi are playing together, along with a little puppy. And playing together, I quite literally mean that Izumi is putting fairy wings and a purple wig on her father. So simply imagine the greatest villain in the My Hero Academia to have a purple wig, fairy wings, and a fairy staff. Yes, that's what All for One currently has. And simply putting it, Izumi is quite happy. But that happiness gets quickly shut down as almost immediately as she starts, laughing quite hard, she begins to choke. And after a bit of choking, All for One immediately tries to, help her. And then after that, she starts throwing up blood. Needless to say, the doctor who was in the room immediately runs over to Izumi, picks her up and carries her, essentially to the healing tube. And at this point, the doctor simply says that Izumi's condition is, by the best terms I can say, terrifying. Because the doctor doesn't know if Izumi is going to live or die. And yeah, at that point, All for One has had enough. He gets his mercenaries and his entire team to be ready in a couple of days. And simply putting it, sorry about that, guys, again. But yeah, as All for One says this to the doctor immediately nods. He contacts the mercenaries and the villains, which, to be fair, the villains were completely prepared, with the mercenaries simply getting all of their, stuff together. And yeah, after 3 days, all of them, along with Kurogiri, who is, simply putting it, I forgot to mention Kurogiri in all this, Kurogiri is essentially the uncle figure for Izumi, and he also loves Izumi just as much as, her parents do, with Kurogiri essentially being like the family butler. And yeah, he gets quite close to Izumi. And simply putting it, he also goes along for the mission, with his quirk being a bit different. Essentially, he could make portals in My Hero Academia, or in the anime. Currently, his quirk is quite more powerful. Along with being able to make portals, he can also make, small and, rather small black holes. Now then, the only difference between an actual black hole and this one is that when he can only make a black hole the size of, a cup. And also that black hole will not, increase in size. Essentially what that does is that it gathers all of the objects around it, including people, and, gets them to the center of it. Sort of like if any of you guys have played Overwatch, like Zarya's ultimate, where she throws down the fucking bomb, which then, gets everyone into it. That's basically what Kurogiri has. But enough about that. Because Kurogiri teleports them to America. And yeah, as they simply go there, they see them. They see, someone they didn't exactly want to see. All Might and David Shield speaking. And on top of that, there are several other heroes there, along with security, but they see the 5 mechs. Or at least they see the containers in which they are being held. Needless to say, the attack starts off like this. All for One uses one of his quirks, which essentially allows him to make rockets. Quite powerful ones at that. And he shoots them through the portal, one of the portals which Kurogiri made. The other villains also use their quirks. One of the heroes essentially has laser eyes, and he uses them to, fire through the portal also. One of the mercenaries has a type of poison gas quirk, and he also sends everything he can through the portal. While the other 5, who are essentially there, both mercenaries and villains, their quirks are more close range oriented. And yeah, as Kurogiri opens up all those portals, they hit. The entire base is up in flames in a matter of seconds. The poison gas is slowly killing the security members who didn't have any protective gear on. The cannons and the sentry guns, which were essentially there, have been blown up by All for One's rockets. And the laser, which was essentially being shot at by one of the mercenaries, it makes contact. That contact being the main fuel source of the entire base. Because yeah, that laser pierced to the ground and went all the way 200 meters below ground, and simply putting it, caused a reaction which made the Arcanum generator blow up. Needless to say, the base was, well, simultaneously burning in the middle of a self-destruct sequence, and also was being gassed. Yeah, it was pure and utter chaos. David's shield was immediately escorted out by the few guards which were actually around him. At the same time, they went ahead and got Melissa's shield as well. And yeah, Melissa has just woken up to the signs of explosions being crossed there. Out of nowhere, several armed men, essentially security guards, or well, private bodyguards of Melissa, enter the room. They immediately pick her up and start running. Because yeah, she was in one of the underground sections which were currently being filled with poison gas and also being simultaneously blown up by the main reactor exploding. So yeah, as they take Melissa's shield up to the surface, David and Melissa, essentially, or well, David immediately goes ahead and takes Melissa. After that, he contacts All Might and tells him, or well, asks him, is he alright? With the only thing he hears on the line is this: several explosions. Because yeah, All for One had just engaged All Might in a fight. And now then, both of them are essentially in their primes, with All for One actually having stolen more quirks off of more people, and All Might actually trained a lot harder, to the point where he is essentially, I believe it was called United States of Smash. When he used that, simply putting it, he could create on a Richter scale a class 7.5 earthquake. So yeah, rather powerful. And yeah, as he then starts fighting All for One. In the meantime, the heroes which were there start fighting the mercenaries, while the villains, which were essentially following him, along with Ilya, go ahead and secure the mix. But as they open up the 5, essentially, crates, they see that 3 of them are empty, one of them has a, well, malfunctioning mech, and the other one has a pure, or well, completely finished mech. After that, they contact Kurogiri, and Kurogiri immediately uses his quirk to get the containers, well, out of there. And just like that happens, the poison gas mercenary, along with the villain, who could, simply putting it, shoot out lasers, goes ahead and he opens 2 portals for them, and then 2 portals right at the right and left side of All Might. All Might backs off and essentially lets the explosions happen. And then, as he opens his eyes back up, he sees All for One simply going into a purple portal, with All for One turning back to All Might and simply saying, "This isn't over, symbol of peace," and enters the portal, with him now, well, simply putting it, leaving along with the rest of his mercenaries, while the base is in essentially complete and utter ruins. The other 3 mechs were actually transported in, well, via secret bunkers, which were specifically made for the upper class of, well, essentially, the company which David Shield had created. And yeah, simply putting it, 2 mechs, one which was malfunctioning, were, well, taken away. With David Shield, simply, he couldn't believe that All for One actually came. Again, sorry about that, guys. that essentially David Shield couldn't believe that All for One actually came here. Not just that, came here with a whole army of both villains and mercenaries. So yeah, simply putting it, that was rather unexpected. But yeah, as All Might is essentially punching the ground rather hard because he just let All for One escape, we go back to All for One and his team. They retrieve the Toombex. The broken down mech is essentially put into storage because it is, well, worthless. While the one which is still working, the experimental, well, Arcanum reactor begins, well, getting studied by both the scientist and the doctor. And yeah, after some time, they actually figure something out. That this Arcanum, if infused or correctly purified, could essentially make, well, a type of healing potion. And I quite literally mean a healing potion. That was just it. Or a healing serum. And let's just say that after 2 weeks of essentially sleepless nights, the scientists and the doctors, along with the main doctor, were able to create a serum, which was then placed into the tube where Izumi was. After that, the green, which was around Izumi, or essentially the color of, well, the water which is inside of there, turned red. Along with that, All for One and Inko also saw something else. Sorry about that, guys. But essentially, as they put that, they noticed something. Izumi's skin turns even paler than it was before, with her quite literally looking like a ghost, with her skin being to the point where it was almost snow white. And her hair, instead of being a black color with tints of green, it became completely grey. And yeah, they didn't exactly know what this meant, but as Izumi now actually started to move, the doctor essentially released her from the tube. As she opened her eyes, they saw that her eyes were now, instead of a bit of a, well, greyish green color, they had become completely crimson red. Yes, something quite unexpected happened. But were they complaining? Hell no. And yeah, with that being said, I'm going to end part 0 of this What If right here. I hope you guys and gals have enjoyed it. Also, I honestly do look forward to, well, making this entire What If. Because all of the ideas I have for it are quite large, and it's probably going to be my largest What If I ever do. Because yeah, it's going to involve essentially the main plot, being of My Hero Academia, essentially going to the academy itself, UA, along with everything which exactly happens, although with several small, well, pieces being removed and some large ones being added. But let's just say that the battles which the two rivals, Izumi and Melissa, will have are going to be quite large, and they may or may not be in space. With that being said, I hope you guys and gals enjoyed.